This meeting is being recorded.
All right, we're recording. I'm not actually sure who this is. Are you on the call regarding external DNS?
That's me, Andy.
Awesome. Hey, do you want to? What should I click on first? What should we discuss?
I guess we can pull up the issue first.
Okay.
Sorry, I was hearing an echo.
I think Rob, you may be getting some feedback because web client.
Okay.
Where you going, Andy?
Okay, so yeah, Mark Church opened this issue to add Gateway API support to external DNS about, I think that's like 11 months ago. And it had been open for a few months and no one had sort of done anything about it. So I want this feature to exist and I need it. So I was like, all right, I'll do it. I had a bunch of questions initially because, yeah, I don't know. I think some things weren't clear to me exactly how everything in the Gateway API interacted, but I sorted through it all and I implemented it. This is the first time working with external DNS. So there were some problems initially because of some dependencies external DNS had. I couldn't add the Gateway API. That got sorted. And then I basically opened up a pull request for this, and it's been sitting around for like 5 months now. And I keep rebasing it and updating Gateway API whenever there's a new release and etc. And last week, Mark came back and said he had been meaning to provide some feedback, and he had a couple of questions and said maybe I should just come to this meeting to discuss it in detail. So now I just added myself to the thing and I'm here now. So I don't know if I don't see Mark in here. It might be.
Yeah. No, yeah, thank you for doing that and for the work on this. I've been meaning to look at this PR and implementation as well. Have you heard anything from external DNS team? I seem to remember on the issue they seemed interested in this support. Have they been? Have they said anything on the PR?
No, nothing. Yeah, I guess maybe the next thing would be to, if you can open up that doc that I linked. I wrote that up this morning. So just, I don't know how familiar everyone is with external DNS, but I just defined a couple of things that they use. An endpoint is basically a DNS record. So like a host name, the targets, the time to live, and some additional metadata that they use to keep track of things. A resource is a Kubernetes object, and a source is like an interface that just provides endpoints. And so in this background section, I tried to basically put in everything that I thought, could be controversial maybe. I don't know, some of it is, I don't think much of it is, but some things are. And then after, just for context, after the background, I have like the algorithm of how it all works. And I literally just kind of read through the code and translated it to English. But I think the background, you don't have to go through all the algorithm stuff to sort of understand some of the issues that might be interesting to y'all. So the way, and none of the stuff is necessarily like set in stone, but I tried to follow the conventions of external DNS and not like rock the boat too much. By default, they have separate sources for each kind of like resource type. So they don't usually have like an Istio source. They have an Istio gateway source and an Istio virtual service source. Same thing for like contour, ingress route, and HTTP proxy. So I did the same thing where I created different sources for the different gateway route types. And so they're all, you can turn them on, turn them off separately and everything, control them independently, which leads us to sort of the next potential issue is that Gateway API seems very specific about conflict resolution and has very strong ideas about that, which I have no problem with, but that's not really how external DNS works. So I kind of skipped trying to do anything about that. So each source generates a set of endpoints for all of the resource types it controls. It doesn't try to do any conflict resolution with its own endpoints that it generates, and you can have multiple sources. So there could be like an ingress source, a service source, Istio sources, Contour, etc., Gateway API sources, and at an individual source level, there's nothing done to resolve conflicts with itself or other sources. It just like emits all of its endpoints up to like the next layer and then lets it control that. So after all the sources generate their endpoints, there's a few steps where it plans what DNS changes it wants to make. And there is a conflict resolver when it does that. And so if it's a new host name, of all the candidate endpoints for that host name, it has kind of like this weird thing that it does where it takes the endpoint with minimal targets. So if you have fewer like fewer IPs, then you're considered minimal. And if your like first IP sorts to be before the other candidate's first IP, you're minimal. And I don't really know what that's about, but it just like makes it, well, I can't think of the right word. It makes it consistent, basically, repeatable.
Yeah, I feel like that smells like a accommodation to me. We had to make a similar accommodation. That's one of the reasons why we have the rules about like, first by creation time and stuff like that. Is that at the end of the day, dealing with eventually consistent system, it's possible for any rule you can come up with to be to end up with a tie. And so, you always end up coming down to be like, in the case that all of these other 4 requirements are tied, then we're going to do something really dumb because we just got to be able to pick one at that point. Yeah. And so it makes sense to me that, that they'd be like, look, we're going to prefer the one with, if you've got one that has 7 different IPs for a single host name and one that has 1, then we'll pick the one with 1. I mean, it doesn't, it feels like it doesn't really matter which way around you pick it as long as it's consistent.
Yeah, and this other next part about that is interesting. I didn't realize this until I read through the source code how it worked, but if there is an existing host name, okay, so there's something that you can use called like a registry. And I don't remember what all the different registries are, but it's basic. One is by using text records, TXT records. I think there are other options, but that basically just stores additional metadata about the DNS entry somewhere so that whenever it goes to plan what to do, it looks at the registry to know more about it. And so if this record it's going to create already exists and it needs to update it, it tries to figure out which sort endpoint to use, and it'll look at the registry to see which resource generated the endpoint that already exists. And if that resource still exists and is one of the candidates, then it uses that. So it's kind of like first come, first serve in a way, but it depends on like when the resource is created or when the DNS record is created. So
it feels like don't rock the boat. Yeah. Kind of. Don't break someone's DNS because someone else made a change that conflicts with it. Like prefer not to break things that are already working.
Right.
They seem pretty reasonable to me, but yeah, it does end up feeling weird. So I guess the question that I had after what you've said so far is, do you feel like it would be fair to say that that the source is generating a set of endpoints? It's a candidate endpoints, right? It's like I am the Istio gateway source, and I would like to have this set of endpoints, and then it just the other thing. The conflict resolver figures out if that can all go through smoothly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing, I just kind of, to be clear though, I just left it all up to the conflict resolver. I didn't try to do anything in the case that, there are multiple gateway API routes that are all claiming the same host name. I don't try to break any of those ties. I just hand it up to the conflict resolver to do what it wants with it. Which, I don't know, maybe that's insufficient, but that's what I did for now.
This is really impressive, and it's a good reminder that our API is complicated. So thank you for putting up with it. The thing that strikes me here is it seems like adding support for routes to external DNS is likely significantly more complicated than adding support to gateways. I don't know, I haven't looked at your code, but have you split those two pieces out, and is one significantly simpler than the other?
No, they're you can't have one without the other. They're
Yeah.
how
So
you separate them.
I guess maybe the way that I had a similar thought to what Rob did, and the way I would have put it is, do you think that it would be simpler because you can't have routes without a gateway? Maybe it's simpler to consider the source as the gateway, and you look at the set of routes that are successfully attached to the gateway, and that have some set of conditions or something like that as the candidates for the candidate. Sorry, it's a bit rough and language, but like, if you see what I'm saying, the having something where, like, if you look at the gateway and say, okay, what routes are attached to this gateway? You know, someone's requested that we do external DNS for this gateway. What routes are attached to this gateway? Let's let the gateway API validation and stuff handle, and the controller, whatever controller is reconciling the gateway API, handle making sure that the host names are consistent, because there is like, I think I saw you refer to it, that it's a slightly complicated set of rules about like wildcards and host names and all that sort of stuff. And that you will need to pass to be able to get like a set of candidate host names. But
Yeah,
I think
ended up doing all that. I had some holes earlier where I knew there were some possibilities that I wasn't considering, but I went back and fixed those. So it does everything now.
cool. So I guess in my mind, the only thing that I can find, like, even the slightest fault with men is that, it feels to me like it would be easier, like, practically the person who controls the external DNS, like, I guess it comes down to who's asking for the external DNS. If it's the person who owns the routes, you know, what you have here is the right way to do it. If it's the person who owns the gateway, then maybe we should look at using the gateway as the source. But it's going to be the practical effect will be the same. You'll probably have to have most of the same code. It's more just like, where are you asking for the external DNS, and who is asking for the external DNS, I think, is the key question to answer. Sorry, Bo, you're unmuted.
Yeah, that
Oh, no, I just came in.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just checking if Bo had a question, but no, you go, Andy.
Yeah, so I mean, that change could be made. As far as external DNS is concerned, the source, like the resource that creates the endpoint, the only thing that's used for is in resolving conflicts. It's tracking, you know, who owns the existing DNS record.
So it doesn't really matter which way around you do it then, by the sound of that.
Yeah, it's not a big deal in the case where everything's working appropriately. Also with external DNS, this is my next point on the list. Whenever you're running external DNS, you can provide flags to restrict the resources that you're looking at by their namespace, or by label selectors or annotation selectors. The annotation selector thing kind of bugs me, but whatever, it is what it is. And so I added the same thing for gateways themselves. So I added, well, not annotations, I added flags to select only, you can either do all namespaces or a single namespace. There's nothing in the middle. And you can apply random, whatever arbitrary label filters you want. So you can do that to routes, and you can do that to gateways. So whoever's running external DNS can select which, you know, namespaces and gateways they want to have this run against. And then the last thing, which I think can be problematic, but I wasn't exactly sure what to do with it, so we'll figure it out. But there are already ways in external DNS to provide host names for resources that don't have them. So there's like a well-known annotation that you can add to your resource to say, like, this is the host name. I think you might even be able to add multiple host names with like putting commas in it. Or you can provide a Go template as a flag, and then you render that template with the resource as the input to generate host names. So we need to do something like this. This is the only way that I can figure out to support UDP and TCP routes. But additionally, I added the support for the other ones, the HTTP and TLS. The thing about the HTTP, and so this is like a little, you enter into like foot gun territory here by doing this, because, well, in my algorithm to actually go through and make sure everything, the routes matches with the right gateways and everything like that, it does make sure the gateway listener would match this, template or annotation defined host name. In the case that like an HTTP route has like an empty host name or no host names, I guess is how it is defined, where it just matches everything, that would be okay. But if the route did define any host names that it only matched these and it's like spec, then even if the annotation or the template matched the listener's host names, the listener wouldn't know to forward those requests to that route. So I just added it like a lot of other external DNS sources do it, but I'm a little concerned about people using it incorrectly or expecting it to work in a certain way and then not working that way. So that's pretty much it.
It feels like you have made the best trade-offs that I can imagine for like what seems like a pretty thorny tangle of rules that you could end up with here. I mean, it's a good thing about open source though, right? Like, if we do find that that people actually end up finding the foot gun potential here, then then we can do something about it later. But it doesn't seem like that you would want to do strong changes to the model that you're using in order to do that. So this sounds really good to me, personally.
All right, cool. I had one question as I was going through this and looking at some of my to-dos. There's, for listeners, right, there's I think it's called the allowed field, and then in that struct has, the different namespace selectors and all that stuff. That's fine. But then there's kinds, which kinds are supported. When I was implementing this, I noticed that the listener spec has, or the gateway spec, the listener and the gateway spec has kinds there, but then in the status, the listener status also has kinds there, and I wasn't sure which one to use, and I wasn't sure if they could be different. So anyway, that's something I wanted to bring up.
Feels like we just need to make that a little clearer. The intent there is that if you specify kinds in the allowed kind part under the listener, then those will be the ones you specify will be the ones that show up in the kinds on the status. If you don't specify kinds, then it's intended that the controller that owns the gateway will fill in those kinds with the kinds that could be supported there. And so the idea is that whatever is in the status is what kinds are supported. It's possible for the owner of the gateway to sort of close that door a bit and make it only HTTP route, in which case the controller that owns the gateway route should say only HTTP route. But so, I mean, because you're not actually doing the reconciliation of the routes, you probably should just be leaving that status alone, like that kinds bit alone.
Yeah, I'm not changing anything, but I am having to go through all the different routes
And check.
or sorry, all the different listeners that are in the routes status of its parents, and then looking to see which specific listeners should be attached to it and how their host names overlap, and picking like the most well-defined host name between the listener and the route. And so like if the route has a fully qualified domain name and the listener has like a wildcard in it, then and they match, then use the route host name, and then also vice versa. So if the route has the wildcard and the listener has the fully qualified domain, then use the listener's host name.
Yep.
So because of that, I have to go through the whole thing and figure out which listeners apply to which routes.
Okay.
I think it can be a little bit easier than that, or less complicated, I would say, in that route status should give you a picture of which gateways have successfully been attached to that route, or the route, whatever. And beyond that, I don't think you need to think much more about it. Just if the gateway is saying, I'm attached to this route, that's good enough. And if it's not, then you can disregard it.
So
That would, I think, mean you wouldn't have to dig too much into the gateway configuration itself.
yeah, that was that was more like what I was doing originally when like my first iteration through this was like that. But then I thought of more examples where like a route may have 6 different host names and a gateway, and it could be each of those different host names could be attached to a different gateway. And I wouldn't know that from the route status. From the route status, I would think that, oh, these 6 gateways are attached to this route, and this route has 6 host names. So all 6 host names get all 6 gateways.
Yeah,
So
you still
that-
got to go and chase down the gateway. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got to go and check the gateway to make sure that the gateway will tell you which routes are successfully attached, and then you've got to do the superset of like what host names on the gateway match the host names that you have available on the route, and those are the only ones that are valid for that gateway.
Yeah, it's like the intersection of all host names associated with the route and associated with listeners that match the route.
Yeah. So yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
is what I would say there. Yeah, like I think there's not much way around that, because we've got this sort of flexible mechanism about defining host names. You are catching the short end of the stick.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it sounds like you've got that well understood and pretty well handled, to me, off the top of my head. I haven't had a good look at the PR yet either. I'm sorry, but yeah,
That's
like
fine.
that document will be really helpful, I think, too. That is a really cool document, and I'm very impressed.
Cool, I'm glad it was helpful.
Yeah, completely agree with Nick on this. Thanks for getting this together. And yeah, thanks for bringing it to our attention in this meeting too. I know it kind of slipped past me beyond this. I'm just trying to understand how we can help going forward. It seems like the next step for us would be either to take some time to review this doc, or maybe more concretely review the PR itself. Is that how we can be most helpful?
I mean, I think from my perspective, I just want to make sure that like I did something reasonable and I'm not hearing any like major complaints. And so it sounds like what I have now is a good first shot at this. And if we find more problems later, then we can go back and fix it. But I think so. If you want to review the doc, that would be great. The doc is basically just explaining what the PR is. So I think eventually, I don't know, I just haven't gotten any movement on the PR at all. And I've rebased it like 10 times to deal with changes to go mods and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so if you could do something to try to help move the PR forward, like maybe just review the PR and from your side and see if it makes sense from the Gateway API side, that might help the external DNS maintainers, I don't know, feel more confident merging it. I just haven't gotten any feedback at all.
Yeah, I think it feels pretty reasonable to me that we would do like a review here and say, thumbs up from the Gateway API point of view. External DNS maintainers, it's over to you to sort of say if this sort of matches your style and does, if you're happy to merge this. But from the Gateway API flow point of view, this is great, is what one of us should comment on there. And then we can ping, and then we can poke external DNS maintainers and be like, hey, it'd be really nice to have this in. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, well, that sounds great.
Anyone on Gateway API side available in the next week or two to review this PR? Any volunteers?
Yeah, I am. I can review that. I'm interested.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah, and I've already waited like 5 or 6 months, so no rush, but just I don't want to get lost. I can wait some more time, just as long as someone gets to it eventually.
Yeah, I mean, it's seriously awesome work, man. Like, and I really appreciate it. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely too much work for some of us to just do a pass over it and give you the Gateway API thumbs up.
Cool, thanks. All right, well, I guess I'll drop out of the meeting then. Thanks for
Actually, it
joining.
looks like, Lewin, you had a good question in chat that I missed earlier. I think you were talking about for East-West gateway use case, how DNS would work.
Yeah.
I think that's just this big unknown right now. I would love to figure it out too. I think Istio may be furthest along in East-West implementation of this API, but I'm interested in others that are in flight too and what they might be doing, but I don't have a good answer.
Mhm.
I'm not familiar with the East-West gateway thing. What
So,
is it?
I mean, we're talking here about like between services rather than from the internet to your service. So that's north, south, east,
Oh, I
west.
see. I got you.
So I would say it's probably not too relevant for your PR as an external DNS. So like I said, I really appreciate everything you've done. I definitely will make sure that I keep an eye on this and poke it along for you. Please feel free to ping me on Slack if you haven't heard from us or haven't had a review. Ping me personally on Slack, please, and I will chase up and I will try and find some external DNS maintainers to poke as well.
Okay,
Because this is
cool.
really good work and I don't want it to get lost.
Cool. Yeah, I'm moving next weekend, so I'm going to be kind of crazy busy, but maybe 2 weeks from now, if I haven't gotten any reviews, I'll start poking people.
And
Sounds good.
also, Nick and Andy, please include me into this loop as well. I'm also very interested on this external DNS.
Great. Sounds
No
good.
worries. Lewin, I'll make sure I hit you up.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Thanks
Yeah.
for all the feedback. Talk to you later. Bye.
Awesome. Well, Nick, I think that leaves you as next on the agenda.
Yeah, so I had some questions here. I literally, so sorry for the verbose notes, but these are literally just the notes I wrote to myself to remind me what to talk about. Yeah, I spent some time having a look at the how we publish the webhook server at the moment. Yeah, I just wanted to ask everybody what we all thought. The idea here is, I think that what we need to be doing for beta is that we should have a standard way to install a bundle that has the CRDs plus anything else required, in this case, the admission webhook. And so we need to settle on like, what's the standard place where we're going to install the admission webhook? You know, I would argue, you know, so what namespace and things like that. I'll open a PR so we can, like, with the changes that I suggest. Broad strokes though, I think that at the end of the day, we should end up with a gateway system namespace that has the admission webhook installed. The admission webhook should use bare version tags like v040 rather than what we have at the moment, and because it's really clear and really easy to use and really straightforward to see. And I think that we should tag latest as the current latest released version. Right now it's whatever build got run last. Yeah, it's not going to be very stable. Latest should be the latest stable release version, but like latest one that's tagged, it's not going to change in my mind. We'll need to, and that means in order to do all of that, we'll need to like tidy up our release process, probably have some scripting and stuff that runs to generate the manifests and manage the manifest properly and all those sorts of things. I feel that yes, we should provide a fully rendered manifest. Probably I would kind of like to see us have the usual quick start single YAML file so that our docs can be like, you know, kubectl this URL. Right now we've got you customize a URL and pipe it to kubectl. Yeah, but I would also like to see us have a separate, like a set of broken apart, the set of source YAML files that we use to render that single YAML file available in the repo as well. So if people are using GitOps or something like that, they can pull those individual ones and put them in rather than needing to take apart a really big file, because I've had to do that before and it's not cool. So those are my feelings about it. I just wanted to say those are what I think we should do. I'll make docs and stuff about it, but I wanted to have a chance for everyone to say, no, Nick, no, don't do that. That's a terrible idea.
Yeah, big plus one for me. I agree with all of those. I mean, the only thing is I hope we can find some, you know, reliable tooling around how we handle release. I know release is kind of a pretty manual process right now. and this adds one extra piece to that. Seems like maybe we need some CI associated with it. I'm not sure, but this adds one more step for every release. So anything we can do to make that simpler will be great. But I completely agree with the rest.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, this is going to be on me to do this work, I assume, since I'm the one who knows about it already. But it's going to be some time spent getting to know the Kubernetes testing for a bit better, which I've intended to do for ages. So it's good for me. But yeah, I would guess that I will need to go and look at some prior art from other Kubernetes SIG projects and stuff like that, and talk to people who are doing that about what they like and what they don't like about their current setup. But yeah, so for today, the thing that I was looking for, yeah, I 100% agree. It should be that, in my mind, it should be that we just create a tag and then the release happens. So that ideally we should be able to create a release from inside the GitHub UI by hitting the release button, making a tag, putting the release notes that we've already PR'd into master, and that's it. That's the release process. That's the ideal state.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah. Or one thing that I did realize as well, looking around at Kubernetes SIGs, a number of them, and I'm happy to ask about this as well, a number of them have performed the master to main migration as well, which I would like to do at some point, if we can.
Yeah, better sooner than later. Yeah, if
I can definitely do that one, although the dependencies are interesting. Do they have a good record of like what places we need to touch? Like all the CI and just random places.
Having a look through, I haven't seen a lot of places where we hard code master, but there are a few. Yeah. So yeah, maybe I can talk to you another time, Bowie, about the steps involved, and then since I'm up to my armpits in this already, then I can at least build a list of places we need to touch.
Yeah, we need to broadcast to the users, because when they go to poll, it might be a little bit of a hiccup.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge migration plan thing that we got to do there. But yeah, I don't know. I don't even know the steps. I know the steps that we did for Contour, but I don't know the steps for here. So I'll talk to you about that another time, Bowie. Yeah, I'm very interested in feedback from people who aren't me or Rob about this. Does anyone else have strong thoughts? Particularly thinking of other implementers who are going to be needing to make sure that their implementation has a way to install the standard manifest. Any thoughts? I'm going to take silence as a +1. Cool. Okay, so yeah, I will proceed ahead with that. I'll make some PRs and start like writing things out in issues and things like that. Yeah, so, and once I do that, please feel free to object there as well if you come up with anything that's a problem. But I feel like what I have talked about is the best way that I can think of to do it. That's it for me.
Cool. Great. Just a couple of small things for me. I don't think this is new, but I just wanted to bring it up in a little bit more detail. I'd been talking about writing some kind of docs that covered additional potential use cases of the API that are just not well defined right now. And I don't think we have enough detail to go into huge amounts of detail on what mesh or egress could look like with this API, but I think it's worth adding some documentation somewhere to describe that this is potentially possible with API. Maybe a list of implementations that are exploring this direction and what it might look like. So it's more of an exploratory doc than a concrete, this is how it is done. But I think it could be helpful to expand on what I think is the primary use case of the API so far, which is ingress. So I've been thinking about writing some kind of documentation around this, but one, does that make sense? And two, are there other use cases I should cover as potential extension points of this API?
I don't know about potential extension points. I mean, I think mesh and ingress are both great things to be thinking about. But something I'm thinking about that was brought up last week about gRPC routes and perhaps the philosophy or what constitutes a route or why we'd add another one. For instance, like SCTP or Quick, or maybe another one of these L8, L7.5 type routes, like a disencapsulated protocol that gRPC is. Thinking, maybe IoT use cases or something. I think that's a really good document to have.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I don't think we have a issue tracking this, but this is a huge gap in our docs right now, and it's almost two different things. But one, how do we decide what becomes a first class route versus what becomes or stays as a custom community route? But then two, how do you build your own route if that's what you want to do? And
I think
yeah,
that's a great way of putting it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
great points.
I think that, yeah, our guidance on, we've got places where you can add your own version of something, but our guidance on how you would go about doing that is severely lacking. And so, yeah, I have a to-do that I have been having a look at, as well as about creating an actual worked example of a policy API object and how it would work and what implementations would need to do to support it. The one I picked for that is a TLS minimum version, because I think that's pretty common across lots of different like layer 7 controllers that do HTTP route or TLS route. And so being able to say, being able to default or override the TLS minimum version, I think is a really good way to explain what the policy engine is intended for. And so I would like to supply the TLS minimum version policy plus YAMLs plus how you would actually use them in a worked example to make that thing clearer, because I think the policy thing is also very unclear. I think in terms of the additional use cases, the only other one that I could think of that I have mooted thinking about was doing, in my mind, a gateway is a translation point between views of services. So ingress is translating between the internet or external and internal, for lack of a better word, whereas a mesh use case is translating between services that might not know exactly how to reach the service. They just know that they want to reach this particular service. Egress is translating between knowing how to ask for a service from inside the cluster and sending that outside the cluster somewhere. And so the thing that all of those gateway use cases have in common is that it's a logical network device, a logical network point that translates between the networks. And so thinking about that in terms of already existing network devices, that's literally what a router is. And so in my mind, there's probably some space for some lower layer like gateway constructs that could let you describe VPN tunnels or things like that. So IP route, GRE route, VPN route, something like that. Yeah, so I think that's a pretty niche use case that might not be that useful for a lot of people, but the people who it would be useful for would be very useful. Being able to describe your VPN endpoints using in-cluster things seems like it would be pretty handy for the people who really needed it. So yeah, that was my thought about an additional use case there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, lots of good content to add in our docs. And actually, while I'm thinking about docs, Nick, you had organized a docs review?
Yes. So yeah, I should talk about that. So I have organized, I will be mentoring a Linux Foundation mentee who we got a mentorship project, assuming that we get people applying for it. I'm pretty sure we will. That they will be doing CNCF tech writers style docs assessment, which is basically going through our docs as a standard checklist of things for them to check, and then writing up using tech writing skills to write up here's what I think you should change about the docs. The idea here is to have someone who is technically literate but not gateway literate to go through the docs and sort of read them for clarity and how we explain these quite complicated concepts to someone who is capable of understanding them but doesn't understand them yet, and come up with suggestions for what we need to change about the docs.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for setting that up. Great.
Yeah, yeah.
I
There's an
think
issue to
that,
watch for that, I think, but yeah.
cool. I think that's all we had on the docs and webhooks. So I think that leads us to issue triage. Is there anything else before we get into issues? Is there anything we should highlight? Any other topics?
I think Lewin had some questions in the chat. So I think you were asking about like the east-west things. Yeah, for within cluster, east-west is handled by core DNS, but I think this is talking about like between clusters or east-west to some other service that's not running in a cluster, maybe. So does that answer?
Yeah, I think I was trying to answer Boy's question.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so I think I know, I don't know how to implement yet, but it's something like, what if our HTTP route is like first class citizen like service? And I define a name called full-L7, this is name. And can a pod in the same cluster, can he just say curl full-L7/version 1 or /version 2, assuming the HTTP route already have those version 1, version 2 defined? That's my question. Is it possible? I know it's not possible today. Has anyone thought about this?
I haven't really yet, but it does seem like it seems a little like where it means that you're sort of it would be weird for me because it would mean that your gateway would kind of need to define this the in cluster host name as the host name rather than like an externally visible one, and then you're kind of having your traffic. Like if I think of the gateway like if I think of a cluster like an old school network, this is a kind of equivalent to hairpinning out to your internet interface to then come back in through your load balancer to then be load balanced, which you can totally do and definitely has use cases. But it feels like just the straight, like in the case where you do like the foo L7 ver1, is it that you're looking to be able to do the path-based routing to different versions of the service to do like, in this case, you're thinking of like a blue-green rollout kind of thing, right, where each thing has a service, but you want to be able to talk to a name that represents the sort of super service.
Yeah, I think last time I think I put the Slack about the use case I'm thinking about. I have
this is the
right.
Yep.
So understand this is for one of use case multi-cluster, but another case I could have inventory HTTP route, or I can have a parking route. So my application can just say curl inventory.com/version 1 or version 2. And I can also say application 2 can say parking, just like, I like to see, is it possible that to the HTTP route, like really the first class citizen down the road, like almost like Kubernetes service, right? In Kubernetes service today, if I define a service full, everything is taken care of automatically, right? All the core DNS, everyone. You just say curl full, and then they will tell you whether it's cluster IP or NLP IP. So I'd like to see something similar. I understand we have gateway, kind of like hook them together. Can application, I want to talk to inventory service. I can go through gateway. or just directly curl inventory with the specific name, and that, of course, that name is unique. And just specify, curl inventory /version 1 or something. Can application do that?
I think there's a couple things here. One, like Bowie mentioned in chat, there may be some intersection here between this and mesh or some other kind of implementation of the API. I think there's also some intersection in, I'm pretty sure I've heard Tim ask if there's ever a point where gateway type cluster IP makes sense, like a cluster IP gateway class. That's very theoretical at this point, but I think that kind of overlaps significantly with what you're describing of this kind of built-in concept or support for gateway.
Yeah, actually, I kind of in sync what I was thinking, it would be great if we have, let's imagine if somebody say curl inventory, and that's basically get automatic extended to inventory dot cluster sets. And we know this is one of the address, come back with the IP, it's all taken care of, let's say, assuming, inventory, this HTTP route, it's for multiple cluster, you can define in the management cluster, and which going to use by multiple cluster. Just like the last diagram I put it in, the same route can be accessed from 2 applications, 1 and 2, but it's really owned by the same team. So this HTTP route is defined in it's like a cluster sets scoped. So today, HTTP route, you can have cluster scope, namespace scoped. What if we have cluster sets scoped? So in that way, for whatever underlying implementation, they can give one IP address, whatever the IP address, it doesn't matter, it's accessed from cluster 1 and cluster 2, it will reach to this inventory and then can go to backend. So I think, how do I say this? If we, if it's part of cluster sets, in the future, if the cluster sets can automatically update the core DNS, and my application, whether class, my application, I can just say curl inventory.com, and it will get automatic expanded to inventory.cluster sets, and I'll get an IP address, and I can just send it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that it sounds a lot like the dream end state of a cross-cluster service mesh, right? Like what you're talking about in my mind is the exact thing that someone is talking about when they say, I want a cross-cluster service mesh, because I want any service running in any of the clusters that are part of the cluster set to be able to access the inventory service by asking for the inventory service. The service, the decision about where that inventory service is served out of is not what I am interested in as the owner of App One. All I care about is that I get to inventory service within some specified, service level agreement. And doing what you're talking about is sort of the dream, like I said, the dream end state of that sort of thing, where you have a cross-cluster service mesh is exactly what it is. It's like, any service can ask for any other service by a single name across the whole thing, and be comfortable that it's going to access it by the best way, where the best way is defined by the person who owns the service you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jeff.
That's exactly what we do with console.
Yeah,
service mesh, so we can have the mesh span. So it's I'm not sure it makes sense for us to approach that with a gateway API.
Yeah, I feel like the gateway API itself is a part of a thing that you would use to implement that, because, as I said before, the gateway is the point at which you translate between different views of the network, right? And so in the case that you're doing like a multi-cluster kind of thing, if you're doing the service export, service import parts that are multi-cluster, the current sort of upstream approach to multi-cluster does, then when you import a service, maybe you want to refer to the service that you're importing by like inventory.com, and that inventory.com points to a gateway in the other cluster that then lets that other cluster abstract away exactly what version they're running and all that sort of stuff, so that there's a layer of abstraction for them to do. So I feel like the gateway API as we have it today feels like a necessary but not sufficient part of a upstream solution for multi-cluster stuff. If you understand what I'm saying, Lewin. So the thing that we're doing here in this meeting is like defining how you translate between like stuff that doesn't, for example, for ingress use cases, stuff that doesn't know about how the cluster networking works to stuff that does, internet to cluster essentially. But the thing that Rob mentioned before about a cluster IP thing would be where you're translating between like something that's in the cluster, but it wants to just talk to an inventory service and I don't care about how it's running. And then the people who are running the inventory service can abstract away like blue-green migration between deployments and all this sort of stuff with still having a single name to talk to. You know, all of those things have in common that you're translating. That's the key part of the Gateway API is the translating part. The translation is important to be able to do the multi-cluster stuff, but it's not sufficient. You need to have like a way to look up all of the names, or how do you know that you can talk to the inventory service by the name inventory and things like that, right? And so I think that's what Jeff talking about a lot of what Consul does, is to solve some of the service discovery problem for you. So we're all going to end up approaching these same problems in different ways, like, or needing to solve this same problem, I think. And so I definitely think that there's a lot of crossover between the mesh use case, the egress use case, what we're talking about with Gateway API, and what you're talking about, Lewin, that all of those things are useful things that we need to do, and that what you're talking about is 100% useful. And I agree that that is a great thing to work towards. I feel like is going to need a bit more cross communication than we have available in this meeting to talk about it, because we're going to need there's already an existing multi-cluster stream in the rest of the Kubernetes project that needs to be coordinated with. I feel like this project, the meeting that we're having now, needs to coordinate with the multi-cluster thing for the use case that I was talking about, where I am in cluster A and I want to access a cluster in cluster B, and that service in cluster B doesn't want to expose all of its sausage makings. It wants to say, access me via this name. Because the other way that you can solve this is just make all the clusters have all their endpoints visible, and you just use a cluster and do some DNS importing. There's a very simple way that you can do that. I think that's not very practical, because it doesn't do that abstraction thing. You don't get to encapsulate how a service runs, and so that the people who own the service can do what they want. Sorry, I talked a long time about this. It's been sitting in my head for a long time too.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, if you want to have a chat sometime, Lewin, to talk more about this and maybe work through, like, have a virtual whiteboard and draw some diagrams and work through this,
Sure.
I'd be more than happy to do that with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I agree with all that, and I'd say this is likely worth, if we don't already have one, worth an issue, just to make sure we're tracking the discussion. I feel like there's more people interested in this topic than are at this meeting, and so just having some place to clearly describe the use case, and that, like Nick mentioned, this topic spans a lot of different areas. It spans potentially mesh. It spans potentially cluster IP, it spans multi-cluster, and it's broad. And so there's a lot of people that are working on different subsets of that, but trying to pull it all together would be very interesting. Yeah, I think.
Sorry, I talked for a long time. Thank you for asking the question, by the way.
No, yeah. That's great. Thank you for raising that. I think we just have a couple minutes left to go through any outstanding issues or questions. Egress use cases, this is hopefully going to be covered for docs, but this is just tracking a question that we got in Slack recently. So if anyone does have use cases, this would be a great way to track them, but I don't know that we need much conversation on that in this meeting. Docs assessment, Nick, you already covered that. Yeah, I don't know who is available, but we have SIG security now. If anyone wants to volunteer to reach out to them to make sure we have some scanning in place, that would be awesome. I know, right now I know we have some vulnerabilities affecting our Python dependencies, which are just used for build, and I don't think they're actually used, but our requirements.txt is out of date, and so we need to work on this, and we need to have some automation around this. Yeah. Nick,
Yeah, basically all of the ones that say admission webhook are the admission webhook pre-beta cleanup tasks is like the epic, and those are like sub issues essentially. GitHub has a thing where you can take the task list and actually just click a button and it makes you an issue that covers that task. So that was what I did.
That makes a lot of sense. Cool. Well, thank you for creating these. These are going to be helpful to track of all of these. Nick, are you volunteering to lead most of these, or do you want help with any or all?
I mean, I'll lead them for now and sort of start trying to push them along a bit, and then if they get to a point where I'm where I think that it's useful for not just one person to be like, until I have a better idea of which ones interact with which, it's probably best to just have one person leading them all and trying to figure out what we need to do. Once I have some better to-do lists, I will try and I'll start adding help wanted and stuff like that and picking them a bit more.
Awesome. Great. And I think that that takes us until last year. So perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone for meeting today. Great discussion all around. I think if we don't have anything else, we're at time, so we can call it. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Cool.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.